Hey, everybody, it's Mark Jensen. Thank you so much for coming to my podcast, my channel, whatever. As many of you know, I don't do this as consistently as I would want to because I'm also working in the business. I would consider this part of when I want to network and work on the business. However, anytime there's a new real estate book, particularly in the multifamily space, I do whatever I can to jump in and take as much in as I can and just learn about what other experts in the market are doing and what information there is out there on our industry. And I couldn't be more excited than I was to talk to Beau Beery. So Beau is one of those guys that just has that confidence, that aura to step out of his, I guess, the traditional brokerage persona and truly become himself. And in watching him grow his practice, but also just in the value that he provides to the overall, our network of multifamily brokers and people in the investment industry. I had a great time interviewing him about his latest book, which I finished today on Audible. Go check it out. I'll make sure that there's links, in the below in the show notes. Beau is incredibly energetic, incredibly knowledgeable. And if you watch any of his YouTube videos, you know how professional he is. What I took away from his book, though, is just how unemotional and analytical he is to his approach. And I think there's a lot to learn from that, both from a broker standpoint, but most importantly, to become and be consistently an elite investment person. Let me back up. An elite multifamily investor. And that's kind of his goal. Industry secrets, industry insights, but he just has a great energy about him. Would love to do business with him in the future. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy a little bit about Beau just really quickly. He's been in the commercial real estate business in Florida since 1999. He earned a bachelor's degree in marketing and master of science degree in real estate from the University of Florida. He also holds the prestigious CCIM designation, which is awesome. The guy is a true professional in our industry. In 2011, he teamed up with Todd Ravensberger, and they actually ran and owned the Coldwell Banker commercial moniker in northern Florida, probably all of Florida. I don't know, probably northern Florida. He today runs his own boutique firm, which he started. And during the pandemic, I started connecting with Beau because I was really impressed by some of the videos that he was putting out and the content that he was putting out, the value that he was providing. But he was also on some pretty incredible panels and interviews with some people that obviously I follow and stay in touch with in the industry. So with no further ado, I want you guys to listen to all the things that Beau has to say when it comes to becoming an elite investor in the multifamily space. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for spending some time. I'd like to say I'm the highest energy commercial real estate broker that exists in the United States of America, but sadly, I'm number two. My esteemed colleague here and one of my favorite guests to have on, Beau Beery. So you've been a broker. I mean, you entered the space in 99. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
So I'm a little bit behind you. I started in October of 2004, but you probably saw a pretty initial good run then, or maybe not. That was sort of the
2000 was definitely slow. So it was like 99, 2000. It was slow. But when I started with Trammell Crow Residential on site doing leasing and management. So I was like on site with apartment complexes, learning it from the ground floor during an actual new construction project in Gainesville. And it wasn't until 2003 that I started in full-time brokerage. So you and I are probably on the same time as far as actual brokerage goes.
We're on here because Beau just wrote a book that blew me away. I mean, we were joking, and he actually alludes to this early in his chapters that, a lot of their commercial real estate books that are out there, they're great. They're kind of how-tos and how to underwrite and what is net operating income and all that stuff. And Beau just went specific to kind of a market sector that we'll talk about a little bit here, but I just was really impressed. And so I wanted to jump on with Beau. As a fellow broker, I feel like he's done me a huge favor, particularly with how hot the market is currently. I think that so many people can benefit and probably already have and will continue, one, from knowing and following you, but two, certainly reading this book, Multifamily Investors Who Dominate. So
that's what it looks like.
I want a signed copy. I did the Audible, which is even better because you get to hear the,
oh yeah, I'll totally send you one. That's right. I like that.
I read a lot. Kind of one of my big things in 2018. My goal was 52 books. I only got through 28, which was plenty.
That's really impressive.
But thank you. We talked earlier about Blaine Strickland. I read both of his books, so shout out to Blaine. But your book is different. And what was sort of the driver behind? I mean, you could have written out about anything, right? You could have written another book on due diligence. You could have written a book on Florida multifamily and your experience there. Like, what was the driver behind focusing on investors and helping them dominate?
You and I have been in the brokerage business, and you and I have seen a lot of players do things the right way, and then there's a group that just absolutely kills it, and just do significant number of transactions per year. And then everyone else, which is actually the vast majority of investors, do things wrong. They make all kinds of little mistakes that add up and they don't know they're doing them. And then of course, they don't know why they're not buying 5, 10, 15 transactions a year. They're doing one every couple of years. And they're the same ones who complain about not being able to find assets. And then the prices are too high and the brokers are pushing them up too high and the market's too hot and all these excuses for why they're not picking up assets. It's more about becoming the type of investors where you don't find the assets find you. Blaine, my coach, just kept pushing me to write this book for 2 or 3 years. And I myself came up with every excuse on the planet why I didn't have the time to do it and, blah, blah, blah. But I finally decided, you know what? I just want to spill my guts. I want to be able to speak into this book what you and I as brokers have wanted to tell investors our whole lives. Like, this is how you operate in a manner in which I and every broker I know in the space falls in love with you. And we think of you first when we get a listing.
And you did that. I mean, as I read through it, it was funny because these are like the unspoken truths amongst brokers. To your comment about somebody that does something great, maybe you tell a couple of homies, does something wrong, the old commissionectomy, or they, retraded a deal last minute or whatever. Like, everybody hears about that. And it's interesting because, obviously being in the same space you are, just in a different market. I mean, immediately it's coming to mind. I'm categorizing, right? And it wasn't even like the 80-20 rule. It was like, you have like a 5-10% of these guys that you just want to continually transact with because your life and edify you and everybody wins. And on the other side of that, you got the guys that just grind you. And talk to me a little bit about, there's one section that really impressed me because it seemed like you sort of teed up that one investor that sort of understood our space. But talk to me about your elite investor that you sort of described there. He knew every detail about what you get from a broker. So what do you get from a broker?
I went through, and in the entire northern half of Florida, not including Orlando, there are only 1,935 assets that are over 10 units. And there's only 855 of those properties that are over 100 units. Now, those 855 properties are only owned by 410 investors in the entire world, REITs down to mom and pops, whatever it is. Just 410 who own all the deals over 100 units in the entire northern half of Florida, one of the hottest states in the country. Now, of those 410, I have discovered that only 0.5% of all investors, even the ones over 10 units, the ones who own the deals over 10 units, are elite investors. Most of them are just 2 to 10 person companies, but they're really, really good at human motivation. They know that brokers are the ones doing the vast majority of deals. I did a study from January 2015 to December of 2019. It was a 5-year study, and I studied 350 transactions, which represented 31% of every closing over 10 units during that period. And I literally researched every single one of those closings and found that in my market, 92.55% of every closing was done by a broker. Now, in Texas, maybe it's 85%. In New York, maybe it's 78. In another place, it could be 100, whatever it is. The point is that almost all of them are done by brokers. And it's not because brokers are some amazing human being. So investors have so much they're doing. Investors are raising equity, they're negotiating debt, they have employees, they have staff, they have construction, renovations, all these things. All you and I do, Mark, from the time we wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning is trying to predict which asset is going to sell next. And we try to predict it oftentimes before the seller even knows it. I don't know about you, but I've created algorithms that tell me like when mortgages are coming up, the type of fund it is and how long they own it, the type of asset it is, when renovations were done previously. And so all this stuff comes together. So you and I beat other investors to the punch 93% of the time. So if brokers control whether you see the vast majority of the deals, who do you want to cater towards? Who do you want to turn your whole game to? It's brokers. I didn't write the book to do more deals for you and I, Mark. I wrote the book because this is how it's done. That's all we do. And so if from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, Monday through Sunday, is trying to find assets before another investor finds them, and we do that 93% of the time, we're the guy who you want us to fall in love with.
So the one thing that I did not expect was your chapter on the love factor, because I do that I mean, I just didn't know what to call it. I almost had like this awakening where it's like, oh my gosh, that's such an incredible way to describe it. But walk us through the love factor and maybe, what these elite investors do to earn our love.
So here's the equation. The love factor is an equation. It is the number of deals that were shown to you by a broker or seller divided by the total number of closings. So for instance, let's say you were a buyer who bought 100 plus unit conventional only, and you bought in Austin and San Antonio. And I provided to you during 2020 a full list of all those assets. And let's say there were 100 closings of that type of deal. And you look through all 100 of those closings as the buyer, and you were only able to identify 10 of them that you remember, then you got a really bad love factor, because that means 90 other closings happen and they were never shown to you. None of the brokers ever thought of you. The sellers didn't think of you. Any other person who ever had anything to do with the other 90, you weren't in the picture. And so that's the worst thing that can happen to investors, is knowing that there were 90 deals that happened without them. They were never presented to. So how do you get access to those other 90? That's what the whole book is about. There's several examples. One of the main things that I suggest doing, there's a whole bunch of them in the book. We won't cover them all, but the main thing is when you network with brokers, what happens is for instance, in the northern half of Florida, there are 60 full-time multifamily brokers. You and I know that really the 80-20 rule says that 20% of those brokers, or 12 brokers in my market, do the vast majority of the volume. And Mark, you're probably definitely one of those in your markets. So, but what happens is most investors are only continuously networking with the 12 brokers, or the 20%. And they should be networking with all of them. For instance, if the other 80% of the brokers are 48 brokers, would it matter to you if you had to make phone calls to those other 48 brokers every 4 to 6 weeks over a 10-year period? And yes, there's probably half of those 48 brokers that you may not like. They annoy you. They're cocky, whatever it is. If you could just stomach networking with all 60 of them over a 10-year period, let's say in year 10, that one annoying broker who you had to call every 4 to 6 weeks and stroke him or her every 4 to 6 weeks over a 10-year period, if they produced one deal for you that you made 7 figures on, was it worth the 150 hours it took you to get it? In my book, the answer is hell yes. And so when I look at the elite investors, when I look at this small group of people that I've been following for over 20 years, and I look at all the things that they do, this is one of the main things. They have automated their networking with brokers. And what I mean by that is they actually have set up a system like a CRM, kind of like you and I do in brokerage, where they have imported every broker into their CRM, contact information, pictures. Over time, they've assembled information about them, like who their wives are, what their kids are, what their hobbies are, what they do on the weekend. And so what happens is every time they talk to a broker, they're taking notes about them and they're knowing more and more about them. And then they're scheduling the next call for 4 to 6 weeks. So when the next call comes up, they're like, they can look at Mark Jensen's profile. Okay, I see that he likes to play tennis and that he likes to mountain bike and all that stuff. You see what I did some reading on you, right? And so when I call you in 4 to 6 weeks, it may be 20 seconds of, hey, what'd you do on the weekend? Did you go mountain biking? Great. Hey, how's Sally? Wonderful. And up into business. And so you can imagine if you're an elite investor and you've been doing this with 60 brokers, because usually it's the same brokers. And so these elite investors are networking with these same guys week after week after week, all of them year after year, month after month. And you can imagine talking about family, hanging out on weekends, going to car shows, fishing every 6 months together, whatever it is. Who do those brokers think of when they get a listing? When I get a call from seller Sam and he's like, hey, Beau, my partners and I, we've been thinking about selling XYZ apartments. We'd like you to do a BOV on it. We think it's worth around this. We'd love to see what you think about. Here's what happens. Here's the inside world of what happened. Immediately as I hang up, even when I don't have the listing yet, but I'm sure I'm going to get it, or I think I'm going to get it, I'm calling up like my top 10 guys. And I'm calling up Andrew and saying, Andrew, listen, dude, Sam just called me up. Sam owns XYZ apartments over on Main Street. You remember that one over there in Gainesville next to so-and-so? Yeah, dude, that one's coming available. Like he just called me. I'm getting ready to do a BOV on it. I can't share with you all the financials, that confidential stuff. You will have to compete for it when it comes out, but go ahead and get up on it.
Yep.
And so what happens is these buyers, as you know, they're already starting on their pro formas. They're looking at pictures. They're checking out floor plans. They're talking to their contractors. They're driving by the property. And so when the listing comes out 3 weeks from that phone call and it's hit the website, Mark, as you know, that's why there's 13 offers in 5 days. And all the other investors are like, what the hell? There's no way in hell. There's no way those 13 guys sent you an offer that they'll stand by. No one can do that in 5 days. They got a month heads up.
Yeah.
And they know the market like the back of their hand. They already know what the property's worth. They know what the rents are. They know what the renovations cost. They know what they can sell it for in 4 years. They spent, their hard work came in after the transaction. It's talking to you. It's all this stuff that goes into it. Now, there's a whole other world that goes into it, which is how you operate as a human being.
Yes.
No retrading, right? It's how you talk to property managers when you're touring. It's how you negotiate a contract. And we go through all this in the book. There's a whole world that goes into the number one most important thing of the entire freaking book, which is your reputation.
Yep.
Reputation is what makes us fall in love with you. And it's not just brokers. This is just human motivation stuff. I don't care if you're selling widgets or surfboards or whatever it is. When a new surfboard comes out, I'm calling the guy who I like the most, who has the best reputation of as soon as I hang up, he's going to come to my surf shop and buy my freaking surfboard because he always buys my new surfboard when it comes out. And then he leaves a review for me on Amazon. This is just human motivation stuff.
No, it's awesome, man. And the book is definitely worth reading. As I said early on, it sort of threw me off because I was expecting it to be about brokerage. And I mean, I don't know. Or transaction, kind of like you talked about, but certainly there's those insider secrets. I mean, one thing that was interesting to me is, I asked you kind of earlier, like what made you choose this sort of audience? Was part of it just that, are you feeling the same thing I felt the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, that the syndication model and the interest in buying multifamily in general, I mean, that to me feels like it's gone up 2,000-fold. I mean, are you helping those new investors in that growing market with this book?
Yeah, great question. So I would say any deal over 50 units and certainly more so over 75 is a syndicator because they're very powerful. It's very hard to compete. It's very hard to be a mom and pop, meaning the single investor, the married couple, the rich attorney, whatever it is. You can't compete against syndications. A lot of them make money on the closing statement. They make money finding it. They make money buying it, managing the construction. They make a load of money when they sell it. Right? It's hard to compete against something like that. The book is actually, while yes, it's fantastic for newbies because you don't have to unlearn bad habits of the way you operate in a transaction. But really, the book is mostly for the guy who thinks he's the most seasoned guy in the world. It's for the guy who already owns 5,000 units, but he might have bought those 5,000 units at a different time and he hasn't bought but maybe 1 or 2 deals a year. I get called all the time from investors who do 1 or 2 deals a year and they think they're like fantastic. I know guys doing consistently over a 20-year period, 5 to 10 transactions a year. Those are 2 to 10 person companies. I'm not even talking about REITs, but I have found that the bigger and more successful some of these folks are, meaning number of units, what happens is they grow, and they start having acquisition teams and disposition teams. And the problem is that then you and I are no longer dealing with Principal Paul, who was a cool guy that I loved bringing deals to. Now I'm dealing with a 20 and 30-year-old kid who sometimes is cocky, who doesn't return my call, who redlines stuff like crazy. There's a certain sense of what goes into transacting, and some of that gets lost as you get bigger. And what happens is now that that's the new person I have to deal with, listen, there's thousands of buyers out there, tens of millions of dollars. I want to go to the easy transaction with the guy I like, because one of the most detrimental things I'm seeing for big companies who already own thousands of units is they bought their thousands of units back in the day where they were the man doing the transaction. Now they're complaining because they don't do anywhere near as many deals as the 2 to 10 person company, because the 2 to 10 person company has this. They have this relationship with us. They're the ones showing up on the property. They're the ones walking through. They're the ones negotiating the deal. They're the ones I get to talk to when there's a problem.
No, I mean, I'm glad you answered it that way because I actually didn't pick that up in the book, but I can see how powerful that is. just in my own clientele and my own career, brings to mind what got us here may not get us there. However, a lot of what got you here is actually what's going to get you there. I mean, I can think of a half dozen clients that you want them to be successful, you help them be successful, but you can kind of see their growth, start to taper as they hire acquisitions guys and try to create systems to scale, when really it just comes down to relationships and seeing those deals. So I think that's so true. And you can drive a lot of value to a lot of those guys that probably don't think about that. A lot of it was like, do the work, right? Do the right things, make the right decisions. Reputation's key though. In the brokerage world, as well as the investor world, reputation's everything.
Yeah.
It's hard to put a dollar amount on it, but like when you list with somebody that has a great reputation, it gives the investor pool confidence that the numbers are going to be right and that the information they're getting is correct and that the deal will transact. Your focus on reputation cannot be understated.
Everyone listening to this is like, yeah, reputation's important. I get it. Let me just hammer home the point. In the northern half of Florida, and I go through some of this in the book, I think it's in my intro or something like that. The stats have changed a little bit, but very, very small. So as I said, there's 855 properties over 100 units. Of those 855 properties, if you were someone who only bought conventional, there's only 566 assets in the entire northern half of Florida. If you only bought deals that are between like 1980 and let's say 2015, no more than 40 years old, no newer than 5 years old, that's a very popular age. There's only 306 assets. And if you were a buyer who said, Beau, I don't want to buy anything that's already sold in the last 2 years because it's probably going to be difficult to buy that and add value and sell it anytime soon.
Yep.
There's only 252 deals. In the entire northern half of Florida, only 252. In most markets, only between 6 and 10% of inventory trades per year. I've been tracking this for years. So let's just use 8%. Okay. So only 8% of that 250 is going to trade. That's only 20 properties. That's literally like 2 a month. Now, keep in mind, of those 2 a month, how many of them are owned in long-term funds? They're not going to sell anyway. How many of them just got refinanced in the last year? You're not going to be able to buy those because the defeasance is going to be too high. So my point is that here's where reputation comes in. You're only going to have between 1 and 2 shots a month at an asset that you would even consider anyway. So when a broker has that listing and it comes out, it ain't like if you don't do things right, you're going to have another shot next week. It could be 3 or 4 months before you see an asset that fits your criteria if you're covering an entire half of a state. So the reputation for us isn't just all about we want to work with someone who's nice. We need you to make us look good.
Yep.
So that we look good to our sellers. If our sellers look good to us, they keep hiring us. We keep getting listings. When we keep getting listings, we want to bring them to the guy who started that cycle.
Absolutely.
We're constantly doing deals with the same guys who, number one, close, but it ain't just closing. It's closing in a gentleman-like manner. It's closing in a manner in which I can't freaking wait to not only do another deal with you, but hang out with you, talk with you next. You're my bud.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in your book, you hit the nail on the head and certainly things that resonated with me. I mean, this is absolutely cross-market, cross-nation, probably cross-globe, almost common sense. Which was like interesting to me because I do feel like even though I read through it and I'm thinking common sense, it was amazing. I mean, the 12, 14 notes that I took about implementing these action steps. I mean, one thing I commend you on is it wasn't just anecdotal storytelling. Every single chapter you had takeaways and follow-ups and things that people can do. You're genuinely helping the market to become an elite investor and to do more volume. And in reading it or listening to it on the Audible, which was great, it's super funny because I'm just literally picturing guys that I'm never going to send a deal to. And I'm picturing the guys that like, please invite me to Mexico. Like, when are we hanging out with their families? Right. That's how you build. And most of my 17-year career has been with those guys who are in growth mode. And I was going to ask you that because you touched a little bit about that. And, I feel like you cross-referenced some of that. But the guys that are in growth mode, they'll overlook a $20,000 cost because they want to close. They want to move on to that next deal. I almost feel like it's this abundance mindset, depending on where they are in their career. And then every once in a while, you'll meet somebody that's either an exchange or just, not your typical lead investor. I almost want to hand some of these guys your book without coming across like disrespectful, but just like you're not going to see deals from me or other people if this is the way that you treat me and this is how you treat sellers. But some may or may not care. I don't even know if there's a question in there.
I think I know where you're going with this. Because I talk about this in the chapter, and it's one of the most annoying things you and I deal with, and it's the thing that we most as a broker do this. which is the following story or type of story. What I have found is that almost like I'm using a generalization, right? Because lead investors don't do this. But generally speaking, the wealthier and the bigger a company gets, it becomes less about money and more about ego and winning. And so what happens is when a little thing comes up in a transaction, let's say you got a big company buying a $20 million deal and a $20,000 issue comes up. Let's say something was found underground, whatever, it doesn't matter what it was, $20,000. It ain't about $20,000 to that buyer. It's about winning an argument. It's about making that seller pay. That's not an elite investor mentality. No matter whether you win or not, you will never see another deal from me ever again. You embarrassed me. You acted ridiculous. And I could have taken that to someone who wasn't going to do that. Because what happens is the broker is the middleman.
Absolutely.
The seller will get mad a little bit at the buyer, but the only human being he can talk to about it, the only person he can be pissed at is the broker. And so when you put me in that position, I don't want to do business with you again. The elite investors and most investors who have their head on the prize, which is growing unit count,
right? The long game.
$20,000 issue comes up. They're not thinking about the $20,000. They're thinking about how can I perform in this situation in a manner in which the seller and Beau, the listing broker, is totally cool with me. I'm on his list on the next deal. I'm going to continue to send him deals. And what elite investors do over and over again is they don't ever let something like that get in the way. In fact, they use it as a way to boost their reputation. They'll say, hey, Beau, I don't care about $20,000. We need to go forward to closing, because they know that seller owns 6 other assets in the market. And they know that Beau is going to do between 10 and 15 deals a year, whatever it is. It's a long-term thought process on how this stuff works. The problem is that most of the guys who most need to read the book think they don't do a lot of this no stuff.
Well, that's where, to give you a ton of credit from a fellow commercial real estate broker specializing in multifamily, you are so much more analytical than I think anyone else is in the market. You unemotionally give a formula to looking at the market and deciding, am I seeing deals? Am I seeing the love? To me, I thought that was the most powerful thing, because it's not like, here's how I would have explained it before reading your book. If you're a dick, you're not going to see a deal from me. Like, it's pretty simple. But here's an unemotional way in a chapter to read it, to say, why are we not seeing deals? I mean, if there were 8 deals that came to the market last year that would have met our criteria, and we only saw one of those, what are we doing? And if really the goal is the prize, and the goal is growth, and the goal is more deals, the goal is to become an elite investor, I honestly thought that was the most powerful chapter, because it honestly made me think about myself, about how I operate. Am I seeing all of the listing opportunities because of my reputation? Right. I just thought that was so great, because it was not emotional. It's just math. There's 10 deals that came to the market. You only saw 8 of those deals. Why didn't you see those other 2? Is it internal? Is it systems? Is it reputation? And you really touched on something that a couple of times, and you told some great stories about the brokerage. I mean, the truth of the matter is empathy. I loved your commentary, consistent about reputation, but also the empathy side. I've been in numerous situations every single year of my entire career where this wasn't my fault. The seller wasn't aware of it, and the buyer, came up during due diligence. And what ends up happening, the broker kind of eats it. That's kind of a side discussion of kind of what we end up having to do some of these times to make these deals go. But the empathy thing was important. I think that your comment earlier about a buyer throwing a fit over $20,000, if they had empathy and they put themselves in the seller's shoes, most of the time we're dealing with companies and guys and gals who have the best of intentions. No one's intentionally hiding things. At least I haven't experienced that in my career. And so when things come up, there's a right way to approach it. And I think your commentary on empathy is certainly worth discussing further, or having elite. If you want to become an elite investor, walk us through why empathy is important.
These elite investors, what I love about what they do is oftentimes what I see in some of the best brokers and what they do. The elite investors I work with on the buy or sell transactions, they always really, really research the party they're about to do a deal with. For instance, if you're an elite buyer and a deal comes on the market, the guys I know, they're researching who the seller is, where they went to school, common friendships on LinkedIn. They read the bios on the company page, what their hobbies are. Maybe they have kids that are connected on Facebook. They look at pictures, and they're not trying to be like weird stalkers. They're just trying to figure out commonalities. How can we form a bond here so that we can have a smoother transaction, so that if anything comes up, it's not a battle. It's more about, we're 2 friends who are, I'm like selling my buddy mark a car and something just came up in the inspection, you and I would be buddies and be like, well, yeah, we need to work this out. So that's the first thing they do. The elite investors also never veer from market norm. Buyers will come in from, let's just say, New York, and it's done a certain way, and they come into Florida. And for instance, in Florida, seller pays title. And sometimes they'll try to do the reversed if they're a seller. Those are just little weird things that come up all the time.
I thought that was really important though, because we've seen that in our market where, all these buyers are exiting California over the last couple of years, and there are some of those unique norms. But to your point early on in the book, if you don't know those market norms, even if you're the higher price, you might get bumped out. You may lose a deal because you just didn't know who's going to prepare the contract, typical due diligence days.
Or something that was insulting. This is a major type A personality type of industry that we're in. There's some pretty good size egos. Everyone's got tons of money. Most of these guys never have to work in the day in their lives. And so it becomes less about money and more about doing deals and winning. And it's like, it's a whole different ball game.
Yes.
So when you come in and you're like, well, this is the way we did it in California. I get this all the time. I've done 67 transactions, or I've bought 13,000 units, and this is how it's been done every single time. Like that's some sort of thing where I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then if that's how you've done it, let me go to my seller, okay, and make sure he understands that. I'm sure he will. It's like amazing. And also I talk about sharing underwriting, right? So when you're at a point in a transaction where it's down to price or it's down to assumptions, you've negotiated everything else, you just can't get past it, and you're going to lose the deal, it's about to die, and there's nothing left on the table, the elite investors I see, they'll share their underwriting. It's like giving your social security number out. The important part that I always try to get across to any buyer is, even before you turn in your offer, if it's not full price, run it by the broker. Share some of your assumptions, because what happens a lot of time, buyers, they forget something, or the broker knows something they don't. We can look over and say, okay, well, I see. Listen, man, in your repairs and maintenance section, I see here you have this number. By the way, that was a one-time deal that happened. Here's what happened. The property manager told me about it. You can remove that $35,000. And the buyer will be like, oh, man, 35,000 divided by a 5 cap is a big number. It's always smart to just kind of run by the major assumptions by a broker and then turn it in. If you go through a full negotiation and you can't get anywhere and it's left, I like to then also take your assumptions. I want to take them to the seller, and I want to talk to his disposition people and his property managers and say, hey, here's what they're assuming on this and this and this and this. Is there anything that's off or wrong? Instead of the buyer or the broker going to the seller and saying, hey, they just can't pay your price, it's too high.
Right.
It's basically saying, hey, here's what they've done. Tell me how I can help them get to what we think it's worth. Is there anything in any of these line items that aren't happening anymore or whatever? Big deal. But what happens is most buyers think that it's like turning over their social security number and date of birth. And underwriting is not some special thing. I mean, it's like my 15-year-old can underwrite a $20 million deal. It ain't that hard. What's hard is this. It's getting deals to come to you. That's what the book's about.
Yeah, absolutely. But you do bring up a great point. And that's what I was alluding to earlier with the question about all these things that brokers do. But we have certainly saved deals. Or to your point, one thing I like to tell people all the time is, as a broker, really my job is to bring transparency to the process, bring the market to the table, and then make sure that everyone's talking apples to apples so that we can all make good decisions. Because ultimately the decision is, hey, we're not a seller because we're $500,000 off. I want you to be able to recognize that, hey, you think there's a $500,000 premium. You're buying that asset back for that same pricing. It's awesome. And one thing that you have obviously delivered to the market in your one of the chapters of your book, you sort of allude to this investor that recognizes what you get from a broker. You get 17 to 25 years of experience. It's all free. That was the point made too. All these transaction experiences, pricing in the market. Utah's a non-disclosure state, and I know what everything trades for, right? Like, we provide so much value to people.
If you're listening to this right now, there's a whole chapter on how brokers are paid. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but it's super important that you as the investor buyer read that chapter. And it's not a woe is me chapter for the broker and we want to get paid more. It's nothing to do with that at all. It's recognizing that most brokers, the way they get paid, especially in the bigger brokerages, is, a lot of times the brokers have partners, and then they've got franchise fees, there's corporate fees, there's desk fees. But depending on how some of these brokers are set up, they can be as low as 25 or 30% that they actually put in their pockets from a commission. So they get a $300,000 deal. That one guy that you did the deal with may only be making $75,000. And it ranges all over the place depending on the type of broker. But that's why it's important that if a market norm for commission is somewhere between, let's say 1 and 1.5%.
No, 8 and 11.
Right. But whatever it is, let's say you surveyed 10 guys and the commission for your deal was between 1 and 1.5 among those 10 interviews. And the guy you like is at 1.5. You don't go to him and say, hey, will you do it for 1? That doesn't make any sense, right? If he's in the market norm and he's one of the best brokers and you like him, why would you cut off your arm from seeing future deals from that guy when you just took down his fee 33%?
Yeah, I mean, we go through that all the time. I just went through a scenario and I literally turned to my team and I was like, they're never going to see another deal. It's like, why did you even bring that up? We don't even know if we have a deal and you're already coming after fee. But I do think to your credit and my admiration of how analytical and how unemotional you're trying to provide value to the marketplace to become an elite investor, it is important to know because people come and they say, oh, these guys make so much money. Look at their office space or look at, wherever they live or whatever, or look at the settlement statement. They're going to make all this money. No one deal has ever made us rich. As brokers, you get the value of the 200 previous deals we've done brought to the table on this transaction. But ultimately what we take home is it's less than what you'd anticipate. And you get a lot of value for that. You get an unbelievable amount of value for what you get with brokers, the top brokers in the market, which
and that's why 93% of deals are done by brokers, because the sellers recognize that not only do we know how to price things and we know what the values are, but we have the history of 10 and 20 years of having conversations with the buyers who are going to buy this. Right?
Absolutely.
We know what they're looking for. We know what they'll pay. We know what their pain points are. We know what their background is. We know when they retraded on something. We know what they did on 3 transactions ago. We know what they paid for a certain asset that's very, very comparable that they bought just 6 months ago. All this stuff is in our CRM. It's in our head.
Yep.
That's what you're buying. That's why the sellers are always using the brokers. And that's why you as the buyer, if you want to grow units more than anyone else, that's what you're doing is just you're catering towards the buyers. Because I can tell you, you take a guy whose sole business plan is to buy deals off market, which I talk about in the book is total crap.
Oh, and by the way, you have a YouTube video about off market. I was laughing so hard. Yeah, I was laughing. It's like, because the other thing too is, I don't know if you know Stash from Ohio, but he was interviewed on a podcast that made me laugh a little bit, almost, I'll just say evenly as hard as yours. Stash gets calls all the time and they're like, oh, we went through your 9 listings, but do you have anything off market? Like there's some he's like, I've brought you guys that want to transact. These guys want to sell. And similarly, your whole point about there's no off market deal, particularly in the last couple of years where the markets for multifamily are just, nuts, right? When you're getting 12, 15, 20 offers per deal. So your commentary, and I suggest you watch that YouTube video because it was fantastic. One of my favorites for sure. But there are no off-market deals,
No. I mean, listen, off-market is the word or phrase that was created by brokers many years ago to make buyers feel special. That's all it is, because it doesn't exist. It wouldn't make any sense for me to be holding on to this thing in my little pocket and I'm waiting I'm waiting for George Smith to call me and he's like, Beau, you have any off-market? I'm like, there's a $300,000 commission right here. I've been waiting for someone to call me.
For you.
Here it is. Let's do it. Now I want to make $300,000, right?
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, it's like that owner has had 17 off-market offers
100%.
and LOIs over the last 16 days, he knows what the value is, he knows about where it's going to transact. One thing I thought I wanted to touch on that I took in my notes here, you had a great chapter, a couple paragraphs on sort of the telling versus asking. And I thought that was just really poignant. I think that's probably the overarching theme is like, go into this, be fair, treat others how you want to be treated. But your paragraph on that telling versus asking, just in setting, up property tours, I think was super powerful. I mean, any thoughts on the telling versus asking?
Again, this is like ego versus empathy, right? So all the time, you and I are in transactions in which the buyer is a bull in the china shop, right? And he comes Example in the book is something like, hey, Beau, we are going to do our inspections on Thursday, and we're going to have 3 crews, and we need the seller to have enough staff to cover our 3 crews, and we're going to look at every single unit, and it's going to take 3 days, and we need all their staff. Instead of telling what you're going to do, there's a different way of doing things, because you have to imagine, as a buyer, a lot of what you say is shown to the seller by the broker. Sometimes we're blind copying, as long as it's not confidential information and it doesn't violate any of our principles as brokers, we want to make the seller aware of what's going on, what's been happening. And if you're telling and telling and telling, instead of, the other way to do it would be, hey, Beau, listen, so we have enough people on our team to do 3 tours so that we can get out of the seller's hair quickly. If they have enough staff for 3 crews, great. We were thinking Thursday, but if you have other days that work for you, that's better. Whatever's more convenient for the seller, here's what we'd like to accomplish. We do need to get inside all of the units because our lender is making us. It's a whole different tone, different tone, because something like that, I'm having to forward to the seller anyway, so that he can give this property manager to set us all up for me. And so you can be a dick in your email, or you can be empathetic in your email.
Yes.
Because if you were the seller and you're going to have to provide staff for 2 or 3 crews, and they're going to be tied up for 8 hours for 2 days, and your leasing is going to go down for a little bit, like to be asked in a manner in which is a little more, hey, dude, I own complexes. I know how it is. We're cool.
Totally.
I want to be. Hardly ever happens. And these stories that you and I are telling on this right now, Mark, like, a lot of these guys, they're watching and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's a minority. It's a very minority of people who are gentlemen-like in the way they're doing things. And what's happened is there's a lot of people who are watching how you interact in a transaction. It ain't just the broker. It's the attorneys who are watching how you interact. It's the property managers. It's the phase 1 consultant. It's the title people. All of them are developing a reputation about you in their minds. And those people know other people in their industry, and they know other brokers, and they know other sellers, and they're at a party, at a social event, and they're like, yeah, I was doing a deal with this guy, Mark, the buyer, and he did this and this, and can you believe he said this? And then that spreads, and that spreads. And so what happens is, you can imagine over a 20-year period, you could lose lots of deals, or you could do a ton of deals because you're just depositing into the reputation bank account. And so
I'm glad you said that, because that was my other note. You were talking about, just constant deposits. I mean, who do you want to be in the industry? How do you want people to talk about you? How do you want to grow your business? How do you want to lead your staff and the people you hire in the future? I mean, it starts as we talk through these things. I just start thinking of the clients that I've got in my Rolodex. It's like, they just do it right, and you talk about that in your book too. The guys and gals that just do it right. They're consistent. They're predictable. When crazy things come up, like we didn't know that the boundary was off 8 feet, or they handle it, like you said, in a gentlemanly or womanly manner.
It takes some brain training, right? Because especially if you've been doing it one way, you're going to have to, I don't know if you've ever rubber band and pop yourself. Try to start thinking, like, every decision you're going to have to make, or everything you say, you're trying to think about how to do it in a manner in which you come out smelling like roses, that you look like the big guy. You look like the one who made the right decisions, not, barreling through and trying to win something.
Well, and to bring it all full circle, you say at the beginning of the book, I mean, this book is set up so that you don't have to go prospect, but you behave and operate in such a fashion that deals come to you. And I think that's the biggest gift you're giving to any real estate investor or a lead investor or new investor, is exactly that if you do these things and you follow what Beau is saying, you will have a successful career and deals will just come to you. And I think it
will flood you. Your whole day is spent just sifting through hundreds of assets that have come that are not even on the market yet. Like, these are just phone calls. They're just kind of like, hey, this one's coming up in 2 weeks. This one's coming up in 3 weeks. I just got this call from so-and-so. That's the kind of life that you'll have.
Well, and you finished the book unbelievably. And I wanted to thank you for that too, because I think, I would call myself mid-career, 40 years old. The better you get, the busier you get, and then recognizing what's most important. And I think COVID, in a lot of ways gave us all some of that time to do it. So I'm going to ask you about that chapter, but also I just wanted to say thank you, because you were on one of my favorite webinars during the pandemic, which was you, Bob Knackel, and Alan Buchanan. And it was really fun because I was sort of working through deals and figuring things out. And I just was blown away that, one, you wrote this incredible book during that period of time. Not that you had any downtime, we were always busy, but and then Bob Knackel drove every street in Manhattan, while everyone else is probably sitting on their hands, you guys definitely, you're leaders in your space.
So the last chapter is about how important family is. And I alluded to this earlier that both brokers and investors in the multifamily space are predominantly type A. They're usually males. They're usually between 35 and 55 years old, if you categorize them all.
Yep.
And so we are all the perfect recipe of someone who works way too many hours, that gets caught up in the thought that our life is important based on how many units we buy or sell. And in the end, it's easy to get caught up in it because that's all we do all day, right? Like our whole,
Yep.
Even when we're doing the things that are fun, we're oftentimes thinking about how we're going to do something on Monday, right? And it becomes obsessive. You lose sight of why we're trying to buy more units, why we're trying to sell units. And it's family, it's friends, it's love, hobbies, it's your personal time. And, I'm guilty of oftentimes I'll hit the wall and I have to back it off. But in the last 10 years, I've finally learned Monday through Friday, 6 p.m., I am done. Dinner with my family, and I'll do a little bit before going to bed to plan my next day. On the weekend, if I work, it's only on something fun. Like I like doing YouTube videos, do something fun. But my point is, everyone who's listening to this right now, I'm telling you right now, man, it's only a matter of time. I can't tell you how many times I've had lunch with people in our space that have told me stories about hitting the wall and getting to a really, really rough part in their life because they're just so busy. They're pulling their hair out. They can't keep up. And it's the kind of business where you can work 24/7 and never catch up. And that weight on your chest just keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Before you know it, you're in panic attacks and you can't come out of it, right? And you can't ever catch up. And you just got to ask yourself, what is this for, man? Is this supposed to be fun or not? Because you can easily get not fun real quick.
Yes, it is definitely easy to stay busy in our industry for sure. Well, after this book, I'm sure it's opened up some incredible doors, but what's next in the Beery franchise?
I have eyes on the prize of doing something. We're in a very membership-based world. So we pay for Netflix, we have Apple accounts, we have all this stuff. My coach, Blaine Strickland, he started this One More Deal membership, which is basically for brokers, where brokers pay a monthly fee and they have access to all this content. I would like to, at some point in the future, be able to take sort of beginning to intermediate investors and then also have a whole section for the most elite investors where I'm sort of regurgitating what we're talking about now, but in an actual step-by-step process on how you grow a tremendous portfolio.
Nice. Yeah.
A series that they can become, it's membership based, it'll be monthly, and it'll have revolving content on a regular basis, but something that gives more guidance, because even though in the book I give a lot of step-by-step processes, it's the details that really count. Situational stuff that really drives home the points of whether you lose deals in the future or not. For right now, I'm enjoying doing deals. I'm enjoying, working with the most fun customers. I want to build enough of a fellowship so that when I decide to do something like that, I'd like to be able to offer that. And I think it'd be really, really rewarding to be able to nurture some folks and see them later grow 10 years from now with several thousand units.
That's awesome, man. And you and I have both already done it, right? I mean, we've taken clients from their first acquisition to thousands of units, and to be able to offer that in a step-by-step fashion. A lot of people, including myself, don't know where we're going, right? Like we're just kind of on this transaction treadmill, but knowing and maybe seeing some options and having insights into what you see on a real-time basis too would be super powerful. So, well, I certainly appreciated the book. It caught me off guard. Like I said, you've got a fantastic personality. I love your YouTube video. No question that you're just getting started on the people that follow you, and they should. I look forward to kind of pushing this out just with kind of my thoughts and takeaways from the book, and certainly appreciate your time and look forward to doing, hopefully some deals with you. There's a lot of fantastic investors in the Utah market that obviously buy in Florida. And we love those guys and certainly know that you already know them, but would love to help any way we can to get them to continue to grow their portfolios, because that's just the name of the game.
It is. And I appreciate you having me on this, Mark. I mean, you've got such a tremendous following, and I've been following you now for a couple of years. If you were an investor yourself, you would be an elite investor, which is why you're an elite broker. I mean, it's why you're number one in your market. You exude just in a conversation, the type of personality and the type of mannerisms and professionalism and gentleman-like that people want to do business with. And, people want to do business with the people they like. It's why you and I probably at some point in our career, I can remember times when I've lost listings to like a residential broker who has never sold an apartment complex in their lives, but they were friends with someone who owned a complex, or they went to church coach or they were a neighbor. Everyone talks about how this is a people business, and they're right. It's never more important in this business.
And I don't want to keep it going, but the one thing that I did forget to talk about was I tell people all the time, at least my team knows it. Like I have a superpower. If I talk to you on the phone and I meet you in person, like I know right then and there if one, you're worth spending time with, and two, like if I can transact with you. And you talk about, like it's like when you meet your spouse. So after 20 plus years in the business, I mean, I would imagine you have a superpower, and that's almost not discussed with sellers, but it's like intrinsic, like, hey, we kind of know who to go under contract with. But I know you have that power.
For me, it's not fun unless you're doing it with the people you like. So my superpower is definitely trying to create friendships that I can transact with on a regular basis. It makes it more fun. It makes it more meaningful. It's a marriage. I mean, it's a 90-day marriage on each transaction, but more importantly, it's every day after that, right? I mean, that's
absolutely,
gosh, it's a long life if you're going into a transaction with someone who you know is going to give you a stomach ache. It's the worst.
You give me a lot of inspiration. I've loved following you. I look forward to continuing that. I hope I can add some value and share your book with some people. And certainly, I want to continue to follow you and stay friends in this great industry. And really appreciate your time today, Beau.
All right, brother. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. We'll chat soon.